Alright, so we have discussed the role and the purpose of yoga, which is the reduction of desires. Right? And we also were talking about this idea that yoga, spirituality, religion, these are all synonyms for the same thing. So if what we're doing is reducing our ego and egocentric desires, then we are practicing spirituality, then we are practicing yoga, then we are religious. If what we're doing is not reducing desires, then it's just a name. You know, like I can call myself a vegetarian, and then when we go out, I order the steak. No, I can call myself whatever I like. They're just words. But what am I actually doing? I call myself spiritual. I say I have a yoga practice. Okay, they're just words. Does my practice result in the reduction of ego and egocentric desires? If yes, then it's a spiritual practice. If not, it's not. So there are three main paths of yoga, or there are three main disciplines by which we reduce desires. So they correspond to the physical body, the mind, which is our emotions, and the intellect, which is our capacity to think and reason. So last week we covered the first of those, which was bhakti yoga. So bhakti yoga is the spiritual discipline designed for people who are predominantly emotional. They tend to feel their way through lives. This week we're going to touch on Jnana yoga. The word Jnana means knowledge. So Jnana yoga is the path of knowledge. So it is designed for those people who are predominantly intellectual. So it means that it's someone who questions everything. They've got this natural inclination, why? It's for people who have this nagging sense of curiosity about sort of the big questions in life and the mysteries of life. So what Jnana yoga does is it directs that temperament, right? So what it's talking about when it uses this word knowledge, it's not just talking about intelligence. It's not just talking about erudition or scholarship. It's not being well versed on a subject. So we use this word intelligence to mean something specific in this context, right? So you're familiar with the phrase military intelligence, for example. Military intelligence refers to information. It's the information that I have on my enemy's position and forces and strengths and weaknesses and strategies and everything else. It's just information. So now we can study yoga in the way that we're going to describe. But if we do it only as a means of gaining information, then we're just acquiring something. A businessman goes out into the world and functions in order to acquire wealth. Where I post many things on my Facebook page in order to acquire likes, to acquire popularity, to acquire friends. The pseudo-jnani studies the knowledge of higher values, as we're going to discuss, in order to acquire information. It's just another acquisition. Right? There's nothing spiritual about it at all. So this is not knowledge. This is just information. So he gives a nice quote here. He says, true knowledge arises out of an internal discipline of reflection and contemplation on the eternal truths. True knowledge arises out of an internal discipline of reflection and contemplation on the eternal truths. So when you reflect and contemplate, two things are happening. One is that you're gaining information, you're gaining intelligence, but that is not the knowledge that we're looking for. Another word that we often use for the knowledge that we're trying to draw out of the process of study and reflection is wisdom or insight. So you gain insight into the truths about life. So this is one of the ways that we discuss Vedanta. So in the first session we were talking about Vedanta, meaning the end of knowledge, right? The literal translation. Another word for Vedanta is Sanatana Dharma, right? Which literally translates as eternal principles. So what that means is then that the study of this knowledge is for us to come to understand what are the eternal principles that underlie my experience. Right? So remember, this is a subjective science. It's subjective inquiry. You go to a university and you study biology, physics, chemistry, politics, literature, art, etc. It's objective study. You're learning about something out there in the world. Right? This is subjective science. It's the same sort of basic method of inquiry, but this time the field of inquiry is not something out there. The field of inquiry is this thing in here. It's one's own self. It's the subject. So then what is it that makes you experience your life the way that you do? These fundamental principles that govern all human experience. This is the knowledge of higher values. This is Sanatana Dharma. Right? So what happens is that we start with a general study. When we reflect upon these ideas, what happens is that they become part of our personality. So let's look at this idea for a moment. So when we use the word values, what are we referring to? Because we're talking about Vedanta being the knowledge of higher values. So when we talk about your values, what are we referring to? Yourself? What else? Beliefs? Yeah. So then let's stay with beliefs, because this is a good way to think about it. So a value then you can consider a belief that determines your attitudes in life, that determines the choices that you make, it determines the goals that you pursue, it determines end states of existence that you want to embody. Okay, so simple example. Right? If you have a belief, money brings happiness. It's a belief. Right? If you have that belief, then what that means is that that belief will govern your attitude towards money. It will govern the way that you relate to financial situations, to rich people, to poor people, to opportunities to make wealth. It'll determine the choices that you make. What will I study at university? Well, whatever can get me the most money. What job will I take? Whichever one gives me the most money. Who will I marry? It depends. How much money does he have? So all of the choices that we make, the attitudes we hold, the end states of existence of our life are determined by the things that we believe, our values. So think of it this way, everything that you have ever done, every choice you have ever made is based on your values. And the same is true for all of us. So then Vedanta is the knowledge of higher values. So then what does higher values mean? Okay, so let's go back to this example that we started with. Money brings happiness. It's a belief. Is it true or false? Okay, it depends. So this is a good thing to think about, because anytime you get asked a question, the answer to any question is it depends. Right? It's a safe thing to answer. It depends. So money brings happiness, true or false? Well, you can't really say it's false. You can't really say it's true. You can't say it's false in the sense that if you don't have any money, if you're poor, if you're homeless, then having a certain quantum of money, having a certain amount of wealth coming in, is definitely going to raise your standard of living. It's going to raise your subjective well-being. You're going to be a happier person. So to say that money can't make you any happier it's not really true. However, to say that money brings happiness sort of implies that the more money I get, the happier I get. If I go from 100,000 to 1 million, well, that means I'm 10 times happier. It doesn't work that way. So we know it's not true, but we know it's not false. So there's some truth to it. So let's reflect on a different value now. Let's say we have the value that money has a limited capacity to make you happy. It has a diminishing quality. And if we relate to it wrongly, it can make you miserable. This is another belief. It's another value. The question is, which one is more accurate? Which one is a more accurate reflection of the reality? Okay, so the second one. It's true, yeah, money can make you happier, but it doesn't always make you happier the more you get. Right? There's plenty of people with plenty of money who have committed suicide. If money made you happy, you wouldn't find that. You wouldn't find rich people who are miserable. We know that it happens. So then the second belief is a more accurate reflection of the reality of your life. So a higher value means a more accurate value. It's more real. It's more true. So the job of the intellect is to discriminate. So the path of knowledge is designed for your intellect. That's what it does. It thinks, it discriminates a thing from what it is not. So you're constantly trying to reflect, what is the truth? What's true? What's real? Will money make me happy? Think about it. And so this is what the intellect is doing. It's reacting with the knowledge. Right? So this is the difference between just acquiring information. If someone tells you, money won't bring you happiness, got it, write it down, put it in my memory, good, got it. Storing up more and more information. This is not gaining knowledge. We need to allow the intellect to react with that knowledge, which means questioning it. Don't take anything for granted. Just because it was written in the book, or just because it was said by someone that you trust, that allows you to hold it with an open mind. But we should not accept anything until we've gone through the process of our own intellect saying, maybe it's right, maybe it's wrong, maybe it's partially correct, maybe it's partially wrong. And we've got to find out for ourselves what we think of it. Then we gain knowledge. Because what's happening then is that we are restructuring our values and our beliefs. And there is a change in our personality. There's a change in our attitudes. There's a change in our choices. There's a change in our relationships. I know someone who, in the early part of his life, was a financial manager, and he just poured all of his attention into that. And he was very, very good at it. And then he got to a certain stage of his life, I don't know how old he was, and he had this sort of sudden epiphany. When my fund goes up, I'm happy. When my fund goes down, I'm sad. He said, I believe I am my fund. I believe I am my money fund. He sort of gained this awareness that money's not all it's cracked up to be. So there was a change in his beliefs. As a consequence, his attitudes towards his work changed, his choices that he made, how much time he spent on it. He started to engage in other pursuits now that were more enriching for him. So when we have a change in our values, everything changes. Our attitudes, our behaviors, our choices, and our relationships. So when we function in life with a correct understanding of how life works, then we negotiate our way through life much more effectively. We're more peaceful and happy. And that's exactly what we're looking for. The one thing that we're looking for through all of our pursuits is unbroken happiness. Right? So we're getting ourselves closer to that by functioning on higher values. So in this, there's one text by the name of Bhajagopindam that we study at the academy, and this practice of Jnana Yoga is described using a single phrase, Nitya Anitya Viveka Vichara, right? Which means reflection upon the distinction between the real and the unreal. So this is what we're doing in the path of knowledge. We're reflecting on the distinction between the real and the unreal. What is more true? What is more real? What is a more accurate representation of the reality? So it's a path of inquiry. So remember last week we weren't talking about any sort of questioning, we weren't talking about any sort of inquiry. Last week we were just talking about feeling. That feeling of surrender, that feeling of ascharya, of wonderment, of devotion. So this is not the opposite channel, the complementary channel to that. Where we have that sense of surrender, that sense of devotion, the questioning must go in harmony with it. And where we have this questioning, the surrender must be there also. So the two of them are, when they are in confluence, then we get our spiritual growth. If we inquire into the path of knowledge, if we use our intellect for this without devotion, without surrender, then what tends to happen is that we become more egocentric. We become more arrogant. The more I know, the more I think I know very much. I know a lot. I know lots of stuff. Ask me a question, I guarantee I can answer it. And I get a sense of self-worth out of that. Not just a sense of self-worth, but a sense of identity. That's who I am now. So I'm building my ego. And what happens when someone who comes along who's smarter than me, who's got a better way of thinking about things, who can think much more clearly, and has a broader range of knowledge, down I drop. Or I get angry, or I get frustrated, or I get jealous. Negative experiences arising because of ego and egocentric desire. So when we study in the absence of devotion, this is what tends to happen. We become more arrogant and egocentric. So the humility, the devotion is essential for our genuine growth while we are studying. And the reflection, the questioning, the taking nothing for granted is essential while we are in that state of devotion. They both have to go together. So this is then the basic understanding of what Jnana Yoga is. It's reflection upon these higher values.